Hello there, you're watching Trade of the Week for an insight into how our in-house IG experts place their trades and really react to all the unexpected hurdles that can sometimes appear. Now, we did have Chris Beecham. He was in the studio last week. It was his turn to pick a trade, and he certainly thought that the common currency was going to make some headwinds this week. Let's talk this through with Josh Mahony, because he's here, and in the end it worked out rather well.
Well, it's working out better than it was previously. So essentially what happened was originally we started seeing, essentially throughout the week, we started seeing it move into negative territory. We started moving it into losses. But crucially, it didn't hit his stop loss. And we've now seen, just in the nick of time, he's pulling a proper Chris Beecham here. It's selling off very heavily. So it's moving in his favour last minute. At the US Open, we seem to have seen a big move towards the US dollar. And now we're seeing it break lower from this ascending channel formation and moving low. Now, bear in mind the wider context, if I take it into, say, the daily time frame, the wider context is one of selling, and we've got a downtrend coming in place. So however we resolve this current move, this big area of consolidation, I think that in the end it will be breaking lower. So are we seeing that right now? Well, that remains to be seen, but certainly we are moving back into a bit more of a negative sort of trajectory, and that means that the move that Chris was looking for is finally starting to happen just in the nick of time. All right, let's move on then. We'll push that aside and talk about what you're going to do. Sure. I essentially want to try and catch a bounce in the Kiwi. And the wider context is, I guess, the last, say, 3 months, 2.5 months, we've been seeing it very consistently rising. Prior to that, we did see a pullback throughout May, but before that, we again saw another 3 months of upside. So generally, it's got previous, and we have a relatively consistent trend in play. Now, you can see that we have seen actually selling ramped up very heavily. So this may look like a crazy place to start going long. But that being said, retracements happen all the time, and you see we had previous retracements, and that's where it started moving higher once more. We have a fairly consistent trend coming in play. On the hourly time frame, you can see that we've come into and moved below the 76.4. So I'm happy to take a 3-to-1 or better than 3-to-1 trade for a move back towards the top end of this pattern, rather than breaking below this level, which would create a new lower low. On a 4-hour chart, you can probably see it a little better. So essentially, I don't want it to move below this 7080 kind of mark, and therefore I'd put my stops around about 70.70. And essentially, you've got a 3-to-1 trade for a move back towards the top end of this pattern. I guess the caveats would be, and when I say caveats, it's warning signs and things that make me feel like, you know, the little man on my shoulder that's saying, you might not be right on this one. The things that make me think that is, you've got a trend line break here, so you can see that it's come through this trend line. That is a sign of potential weakening. It doesn't necessarily mean that a trends are over, because quite honestly, you can constantly draw trend lines. If I take one now and draw a trend line onto this, that would look like a trend line break, but ultimately it was just a deeper retracement. So we have seen this trend line break. If we look at the wider context, I'll take it onto the weekly, we can see that we have got this big downtrend since the middle of 2014, and what we're seeing at the moment could potentially be a big retracement of that. So essentially what I'm playing for is just a bit more of a deeper retracement, and certainly a move to that 76.4 would be a great area to potentially go shorter on the longer term. But in playing the more recent trends, if I go back to the 4-hour chart, in playing the more recent trends, we continue to see, if you see this low, it doesn't get taken out by a new low, then we set a new low that's higher than the previous one. We're constantly setting new higher lows, and while we get closer and closer to the previous one at 70.79, that makes me think that for a good risk to reward profile, which is what I've got here, it makes sense to try and continue this pattern. So I will be happy to go long New Zealand dollar against the US dollar. Okay, awesome. And that was very much a technical analysis that you've given us just there. But do you think there'll be any external macro data that's going to feed into this? We've got the RBA meeting minutes, anything like that? Well, essentially, I try and avoid that, quite honestly, because if I look at an economic calendar, I don't see it as an opportunity. I think I see it as a hurdle. Right, what have I got to try and get throughout the week? If I want to hold a position for a week, these are all the things that could possibly go against me. And so the less of them, the better. It's quite a quiet week in terms of the New Zealand dollar ahead. Of course, we've got a number of things coming out in the US, so the US could be more volatile than the New Zealand side of it, but you can't completely negate events, they happen, and that's how it is. But obviously, if I wanted to trade the New Zealand dollar, I want to choose something that's fairly liquid market anyway, and anything against the US dollar generally is that, and you'll have a better spread because of that. So yeah, we might have a couple of more hurdles on the US side than on the New Zealand side, but generally I try and sort of steer clear of any real big hurdles.
All right. Thank you, Josh. That was really
Cheers.
cool. All right, that was an insight indeed into the thinking and the logistics behind placing a trade here. I hope that was insightful for you. If you're going to have a go yourself, whether it's on gold, silver, sterling, whatever you choose, put your stops on and trade carefully, of course, and have a great weekend as well.